Out in the Caspian Sea, 3 kilometers from land, stands a concrete fortress with no windows and a basketball court inside. The Soviet Union built it to test torpedoes, then left it in the water. The Soviet map is full of things like this, built at a scale that assumed the country would last forever. Then, a reactor in northern Ukraine exploded. The money ran out, and dozens of these projects died where they stood. 10 are still out there. Number 1 is an atomic city on the Crimean coast, 80% finished, that never split an atom. We start on dry land with a machine built to reach 100 kilometers straight up. Number 10, the Ionosphere station at Zmiiv, Ukraine. In a field about 30 kilometers south of Kharkiv, 2 enormous dishes point at the sky. One is fixed and 100 meters across. The other can turn, 25 meters wide. And when it ran, it could fire 25 megawatts of radio energy straight into the upper atmosphere. This is the Institute of the Ionosphere, and it was built to study the electrified layer of air that sits high above your head and bounces radio around the planet. It is what scientists call an incoherent scatter radar, and there are only about 9 of them anywhere on Earth. But a machine that heats the sky sounds like a weapon, so the rumors wrote their own story. People decided this was the Soviet answer to the American array in Alaska, a device for brewing storms and drowning armies in rain. It was not. It was a research station, and a serious one. And even at its best, it rarely ran flat out, because flat out meant the electricity bill of a small town. Now, the big dish sits in a quiet field near the front line of a war. The paint peeling, the metal going orange. The bowl is still aimed straight up. Nobody can afford to switch it back on. Number 9. Neft, Daslari, Azerbaijan. 30 kilometers out into the Caspian, there is a city with no ground under it. Apartment blocks, a bakery, a football pitch and a theatre. All of it standing on steel legs above open water, connected by causeways that vanish into the fog. On the 7th of November 1949, Soviet drillers struck oil 1,100 meters beneath the seabed here, and Stalin ordered a town built on the spot. They had no island to build on, so they towed out old ships and sank them, including the world's first oil tanker, the Zoroaster, and poured the first platforms onto the wrecks. It became the first offshore oil field on Earth. At its peak, 5,000 people lived out here, and more than 200 kilometers of bridges tied the whole thing together. In its best year, 1967, it pumped out more than 7 million tons of oil, and across its life, it has given up something like 170 million. But the field is old now, and the sea has been taking it back for 30 years. Of those 200 kilometers of road, only about 45 are still safe to drive. The rest is rusting into the water, one collapsed bridge at a time. Around 2,000 workers still rotate through on shifts. They live in a sinking Soviet city that the Azerbaijanis once called the 8th wonder of the world, watching the Caspian slowly reclaim the other 7. Number 8. The Suffa radio telescope, Uzbekistan. 2,500 meters up, on a bare plateau southwest of Tashkent, sits the skeleton of a radio telescope that has been almost finished for over 30 years. The dish is 70 meters across, one of the largest single dishes ever designed, meant to listen for the faint radio hiss of deep space. It was one of 3 built to the same plan. The other 2, in Crimea and the Russian Far East, were finished and still work. This one was not so lucky. Construction started in the late 1980s and therefore ran straight into the collapse of the Soviet Union, which took the funding with it. Newly independent Uzbekistan had no money for radio astronomy, so the half-built dish was simply left on its mountain. Russia announced it would finish the job in 2008. By 2014, it was reported as half complete. The finish line kept moving from 2012 to some year between 2023 and 2028, and the dish is still half a dish. The plateau was chosen because the air up there is thin and dry and almost perfectly still, ideal for catching signals from the edge of the universe. For now, the only thing the dish catches is the weather, one high-altitude winter after another. Number 7. Dagdizel Workshop. Number 8. Russia. This is the fortress from the start of the video. About 3 kilometers off the coast of Dagestan, in the southern Caspian, a slab of Soviet concrete rises straight out of the sea with nothing around it but water. It has no natural island underneath. In 1939, engineers cast an enormous concrete base on the shore, floated it out, and sank it onto a reinforced patch of seabed to make a torpedo testing station. And it was built to be lived in. Inside, there was a library, a canteen, and a hall for sport, so the crews could stay out there for weeks, firing torpedoes into the deep water and measuring how they ran. But by the 1960s, torpedoes had outgrown it. The newer designs needed far deeper water than the shallow shelf around the fort could offer. So in 1966, the testing moved elsewhere. The equipment was stripped out, and the building was abandoned mid-sea. Today it stands empty and enormous, reachable only by boat. Its stairwells crumbling, popular with the handful of climbers and photographers willing to make the crossing. Some call it the Russian Fort Boyard. Its parent factory back on shore still builds torpedoes for the Navy, but this outpost in the water has been dead for 60 years. It looks like a prison that lost its island. Somewhere inside, the shelves of a library are still bolted to a wall in the middle of the sea. If you are enjoying this tour through the Soviet Union's unfinished ambitions, take a second to subscribe, because there are far more of these than one video can hold, in every republic from the Baltic to the Pacific. And the next few are where the scale stops being impressive and starts being genuinely hard to believe. So that is a fort in the sea. The next one is a whole town, and there are still people living in it. Number 6. Orbita and the Chyhyryn Reactor, Ukraine. On the shore of a reservoir in central Ukraine stand a cluster of 9-story apartment blocks in the middle of a forest, most of their windows dark. This is Orbita, and it was meant to be a city of 20,000 people. Beside it, the Soviets had begun the Chyhyryn nuclear power station, 4 reactors that would light up the heart of Ukraine. Ground was broken back in 1970. The reactor project was organized in the mid-80s, and the town went up to house the engineers who would run it. Then, in April 1986, Chernobyl. When Chernobyl exploded, there were 11 nuclear stations under construction across the Soviet Union. Only one of them was ever finished. Chyhyryn was not. Construction was formally killed by a government order in 1989, and the workers who had already moved into Orbita found themselves living in a town built for a reactor that would never exist. Most of them left. Around 100 people stayed, some of them refugees from the war in the east, who bought the empty flats for almost nothing. 6 children are bussed out to school in the next village. The heating in the tower blocks failed years ago. Beyond the last building, in the trees, the concrete stumps of the reactor sit where the pouring stopped. Unlike Pripyat, it never emptied completely. It half-emptied, and then just kept going quietly for 40 years. And there is a twist. In 2024, Ukraine's nuclear agency named this exact site as the most promising place to build a new plant after the war, this time with American reactors. Orbita may yet get the future it was built for, about half a century late. Number 5. The Sphere, near Dubna, Russia. Deep in the forests of the Tver region, in a clearing you can only reach on foot or by churning through mud in a serious vehicle, there once sat a perfect white sphere, 18 meters across. It was hollow, made of fiberglass, and for nearly 40 years absolutely nobody could say for certain what it was. It appeared in the mid-1980s near the science city of Dubna, and the theories multiplied. Some locals swore it fell off a helicopter in transit. Others said it was a radome, the protective shell for a radar dish, part of the Soviet answer to the American Star Wars missile program. The most sober guess is that it was the shell for a piece of tracking equipment, a command and measuring system for satellites or missiles, and that it was simply dropped and abandoned during transport. The official story never arrived. What it did have was extraordinary acoustics. The inside rang like a cathedral, and word spread, so hikers, off-roaders, and eventually musicians started making the pilgrimage. One physics student staged an entire symphony inside it, poetry and strings echoing around a Cold War mystery in the middle of nowhere. And that, in the end, was the only thing anyone ever agreed the sphere was good for. In 2021, after decades of snow and neglect, it finally gave way and collapsed. What is left is a scatter of curved white fragments in a forest clearing, and a story nobody can finish. Number 4. The solar furnace at Parkent, Uzbekistan. On a hillside 45 kilometers east of Tashkent, a wall of 10,000 mirrors faces a field of 62 more. Each of the 62 is the height of a 2-story house, and they turn together through the day, tracking the sun and throwing its light onto the great curved mirror opposite, which is 54 meters tall. That mirror gathers all of it into a single point, the width of a dinner plate. And at that point, the light of 10,000 suns pushes the temperature to 3,000 degrees in a matter of seconds. It can melt steel, iron, and titanium almost instantly. The whole thing was the life's work of an Uzbek physicist named Sadiq Asimov, and a town called Kuyosh, the Uzbek word for sun, was built for the people who ran it. The Soviets built it between 1981 and 1987 to forge ultra-pure alloys and to bake the heat shields for spacecraft, testing how a nose cone might survive the fire of re-entry, or how a bunker might hold up in a nuclear blast. It was the second largest machine of its kind in the world, behind one in France, and it was a state secret until 2009. But it did the work it was designed for only until the Soviet Union fell apart around it. These days it belongs to the Uzbek Academy of Sciences. It fires up now and then to make heat-resistant ceramics for industry, and it takes tour groups up the hill to watch. Every furnace before this one at least stayed lit. The one at number 1 was switched off before it ever switched on. Number 3, the buried collider at Protvino, Russia. 100 kilometers south of Moscow, under a forest, there is a ring-shaped tunnel, 21 kilometers around and 5 meters wide, sunk as deep as 60 meters into the ground. It is very nearly the size of the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, the machine that would later find the Higgs boson. The Soviets got there first, or very nearly. The town above it, Protvino, had been built in the 1960s around an older machine that was once the most powerful accelerator on the planet. Work on the new tunnel started in 1983, and it was meant to hurl protons around that 21-kilometer ring and smash them together at 3 trillion electron volts, energies no accelerator on Earth could then reach. By the mid-1990s, the tunnel itself was finished, the full loop closed under the trees. But a tunnel is the easy part. To make it work, the plan needed 2,500 superconducting magnets, each weighing about 10 tons, and by the time the money ran out, only a few dozen had been built. Then, Russia decided to join the European project in Geneva instead, and the reason to finish its own collider quietly evaporated. So the ring sits there, complete and empty, a circle of concrete longer than most underground lines that never accelerated a single particle for the job it was dug for. It has to be pumped and ventilated to this day, because if it floods, it takes a slice of the region's groundwater with it. In 2026, a Russian institute set aside money just to study whether the thing could ever be revived. Every project on this list was killed by something you can measure. Money, mostly. Physics, sometimes. The one still waiting at number 1 was killed by a single night in the spring of 1986. Number 2. The Kola Superdeep Borehole, Russia. On a low rise of Arctic tundra near the Norwegian border, under a rusted metal cap held down by a ring of heavy bolts, is the deepest hole ever drilled into the earth. It goes down 12,262 meters. That is deeper than the Mariana Trench, and it is deeper than Everest is tall, and the hole itself at the bottom is only 23 centimeters across. Drilling began on the 24th of May, 1970. The Soviets wanted to punch through the crust and reach the mantle, and they aimed for 15,000 meters. They never got there. The deeper they went, the hotter it became, far hotter than the models had promised, until the rock at the bottom was around 180 degrees and behaving less like stone and more like plastic. The drill could not cope. And then the country paying for it collapsed. Drilling stopped in 1992. The site was decommissioned in 1995, and the derrick was pulled down. If you search for this place online, the internet will try to sell you a recording of the damned screaming up through the rock, the so-called well to hell. That part is a hoax. The real findings were stranger because they were real. The drill never hit the layer of rock the textbook said was down there, and geologists had to rewrite part of the chapter. 2-billion-year-old microfossils came up from 4 miles down, 24 species of them, and there was liquid water where no water should have been. Today, there is nothing to see but that welded cap in the tundra, sealing the deepest thing humanity has ever made. Number 1. The Crimean atomic station at Shcholkine, Crimea. On a strip of land between the Black Sea and a salt lake, a grey concrete block the size of a cathedral stands alone in the steppe. For years, a construction crane taller than the building itself loomed over it, and base jumpers used to climb the crane and throw themselves off the upper arm, 120 meters up. The building beneath them was a nuclear reactor that never held a single gram of fuel. The idea was born in 1968. In 1975, they laid the first stone. This was to be the power station for the whole of Crimea. 4 reactors of the newest Soviet design, with a brand new town built beside it for the people who would run the place. They named that town after Kirill Shcholkine, one of the fathers of the Soviet atomic bomb. By the mid-1980s, it was nearly there. The first reactor was 80% complete. The second was 18%. Then Chernobyl. After the explosion, every Soviet nuclear site was inspected all over again, and the engineers looked harder at the ground under Shcholkine. They found a geological fault. The site could shift. That was the official reason. The quieter reason was that the money had simply gone. 500 million rubles were already in the ground, in 1980s prices, with another $250 million in materials sitting in warehouses. The Guinness Book of Records lists it, to this day, as the most expensive unfinished nuclear reactor in the world. Construction stopped in 1987. It was cancelled in 1989. No fuel was ever delivered. And then something genuinely strange happened. Through the 1990s, the empty reactor hall became a nightclub. A techno festival called Kazantip moved in and threw raves inside the building. And for a few summers, the most expensive dead reactor on Earth was the loudest place in Crimea. The crane is gone now, cut up for scrap. The reactor compartment was sold in 2005 to a company nobody has named, for roughly the price of a nice flat. The Soviet Union set out to build a machine that would power a peninsula for 100 years, and in the end, it lasted exactly as long as the country that ordered it. There are places on the old Soviet map you cannot visit because they were never finished. There are places you cannot visit because they were welded shut. And there are places you cannot visit because the country that built them stopped existing before it worked out what to do with them. 10 of them today. A reactor in northern Ukraine killed 2 of them outright, and the rest died more slowly alongside the state that dreamed them up. That fortress from the very start is still out there in the water, by the way, library and all, waiting for a boat that stopped coming in 1966. There are more of these, there are always more. Subscribe and we'll go and find the next 10 together. Thank you.